Hey everyone, Nisa Bell here. I want to do something a little lower key tonight since if I'm timing this right, I'm in Japan right now, and I can't exactly bring all my tools in my carry-on. So instead of working on an instrument or a pedal or whatever else I can get my hands on, let's talk about 5 things I wish I knew before I started modding guitars in the first place. So I've been working on instruments at this point for a little over a decade, and in that time, I've made more than my fair share of mistakes.
Why would they make that not fit?
Most of these blunders just wasted my time, my parts, but some of them have resulted in injury to myself, or even worse, to a guitar. So if you're new to working on your own instruments, I thought I'd save you some of the hardships I encountered by just telling you what I learned from those experiences instead. Now, I'm not a professional by any means. I've mostly worked on my own instruments, and I've only ever teched for my friends' bands. So if you're expecting some seasoned vet with tours and tours under her belt, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm just a girl on the internet with a soldering iron. But if that's good enough for you, then let's jump into it. Let's start with one of the more recent lessons I've had to learn. Wear the right clothing. They always say dress for the job, and the job we're doing here usually involves sharp things, hot things, and more often than not, some combination of the two. So let's start with sleeves. Short sleeves are gonna be your best bet in terms of mobility, but if you're partial to something longer, just make sure they're tight to your forearms. The last thing that you want are loose long sleeves like these. This is a really good way to knock tools off your workbench and onto places they shouldn't be. For example, you can knock a hot soldering iron right onto your foot, or a sharp knife straight into your thigh. And yes, I've done both of those, thanks for asking. The next thing to think about is fabric. The most common mods that I do involve a fair amount of soldering, which does increase the risk of molten metal flying through the air. Natural fibers like cotton, linen, and wool are typically durable enough for molten solder to land and cool without dealing any damage. Synthetic fibers, on the other hand, have a comparably low melting point, and thinner fabrics will even melt right off of you if any molten metal comes remotely close. If you've been following my channel for the past few months, you might be familiar with a certain black polka dot dress of mine. Well, now it's a guitar strap. Why? I think you might be able to guess. So make sure to keep your sleeves short and your fabrics natural. And if you need a new guitar strap, I promise you there are better ways than destroying your favorite dress. Number 2, soldering irons are loud. Now, before you call me crazy, no, soldering irons are not loud for you and me. They're loud for our guitars. Let me show you what I mean. Ariel is the quietest and most well-shielded of all my guitars, and this is what her noise floor sounds like. And this is what it sounds like when my soldering iron's on. It's pretty loud, isn't it? Now, I won't bore you with the physics that I pretend to understand, but reasons aside, this interference makes it hard to diagnose problems with your shielding or your wiring. When I was first getting started, I tore down and rewired my first bass more times than I could count, searching for some non-existent grounding issue that was causing all the noise that I was hearing. It was only after I turned off my iron in defeat that the noise stopped, and I realized there was never an issue in the first place, and that I had just wasted a perfectly good Saturday. So in short, make sure to turn off your iron before you test for signal. Now, number 3, make sure your parts are the right size and be prepared when they're not. This applies to everything from neck scale length to aftermarket pickguards to even tuning machines. But the place where I've run into this issue the most is with metric versus imperial parts. Generally speaking, import guitars like Squiers, Epiphones, or non-American Fenders are built with metric sized parts, while Gibsons and American Fender guitars are built imperial. Additionally, a lot of common aftermarket parts like Switchcraft jacks and CTS pods are typically made to imperial measurements. So if you're looking for the quickest and most seamless way to replace parts on your guitar, be sure you check that the parts you're ordering and the parts that you're replacing are made to the same specs. Now, does this mean that you can't use American parts in like a Japanese Fender? No, you absolutely can, and I do it all the time. But you do need to be prepared for the extra work that entails. This may involve filing holes to the right size, filling and drilling others to make them smaller, or even routing out cavities to make parts fit. As for other non-compatible parts, there are a ton of conversion parts out there to help you out. Want to put vintage Clusen style tuners in a guitar drilled for moderns? There's a bushing for that. Want to make your Telecaster a Les Paul in disguise with the same scale length? There's a conversion neck for that one. The beauty of guitar modding is that we can do absolutely anything we want, but if you are going to spec swap to build your dream guitar, keep in mind any extra work and extra parts you might need. And number 4, don't start with a semi or hollow body guitar. So my very first electric guitar was this beautiful Ibanez AM73B named Alice. She wore a set of pearly gates, a couple coil splits, and I loved that guitar right up until the day she was stolen. But my God, that was the worst guitar in the world to learn on. The wonderful thing about solid body guitars is that all their electronics are easily accessible, whether through a backplate, a pickguard, or a control plate. With hollow body guitars, the only way to work with the electronics is to pull every component you need to work with out through the F-hole. But getting the components out is only half the battle. The real struggle is putting them back when you're done. Now, by no means am I saying don't work on semi-hollow guitars, but before you do, know what you're getting yourself into. Here's a few tricks that I learned to make the process a little bit easier. Number 1, tape up your F-holes. Since we're repeatedly pulling components through these openings, we increase the risk of scratches and chipping. The tape acts as a barrier to help mitigate some of that damage. Number 2, cover the area around the F-hole with a towel. This protects the finish from solder drips or the occasional drop tool. Number 3, have every tool at your disposal, even ones you don't think you need. I use anything from tweezers to string to even motorcycle spokes to help seat components back into place. And finally, when none of the tools you have work, make better ones. This is a guitar cable end soldered to a wire, and it allows me to attach the end to the output jack and pull it through the body to where it needs to be. Sometimes, the best tools for the job are the ones that you make yourself. And the last tip that I have for you is number 5, mod to solve a problem. I did my first pickup replacement at the tail end of elementary school, and I remember at the time being pretty disappointed with the outcome. I was expecting to sound like all the bands I was listening to with perfect tone and crystal clear articulation, but when I flipped on my amp, I still just sounded like me. That's because the issue wasn't my pickups, my pots, or even my amp. The issue was a skill-based one. I was a kid who had only been playing bass for about a year, and a new pickup wasn't gonna change that. It took me a while to get here, but I think of modding as finding a solution to a problem. Is your sound too bright? Maybe try pots with less resistance. Is your instrument too noisy? Some shielding may help you there, but also make sure your soldering iron is off. If the problem is that there's still sounds out there that you haven't tried yet, then by all means, keep going until you've heard absolutely everything the world has to offer. But don't expect a new pickup or part to solve all of your problems. The right parts can get you closer to sounding like your favorite musicians, but you still need to take care of that extra last little bit yourself. To me, a well-modded instrument is one that gets you excited to play every single time you pick it up. That way you're more motivated to tackle the problems that sandpaper and solder can't quite solve. Now, like I said at the top, I've only been at this for a little over 10 years and never professionally. And while I've already messed up a ton, I know that I'll keep making mistakes and learning from them as I keep going. But I also know that a lot of you out there have a ton more experience than I do, and I'd love to hear what bits of wisdom you can give to the rest of us down in the comments below. I think that's all I have for you tonight, but once I'm back home, let's build something fun. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you in the next one. Happy playing!